Hi guys, and welcome to my breakdown of the Cartographer's Cup, the 8-man team event that was recently held for Malifaux in Warsaw. It was a hell of an event, a weekend to remember with at least 80 players and quite a few organisers and so on and so forth. For those who maybe don't know me, if this is the first time you've come to this channel, my name is Drayson. I was the captain for the Czech and Slovak team this year, and I am a fairly regular player on the MWS and Vassal in general, and pretty much always on 10 Thunders. There is a hell of a lot to talk about with this event, and so instead of just talking about what I'm going to talk about, I'm just going to get in there and get right to it. So let's start with the venue. It was a sort of district of the city venue, so it was controlled by the municipality, and generally speaking, lots of good things to say about it. So really high ceilings, a lot of light and air in the room, and also there were a really good number of sound breaks. So despite the fact that there were 80 people in the room, all trying to communicate across 3 feet of table, it was really genuinely okay to hear your opponents the vast majority of the time. And I know that that can sometimes be quite important, especially when you've got people of different nations who are maybe non-native speakers, who have all got, you know, their native accents affecting their English, and then when you've got multiple of those all trying to hear each other across 3 feet of space, and then with others doing the same thing behind and in front of them, that can really cause a lot of vocal chaos that makes it difficult to, you know, understand and have a pleasant game. In this case, it really was not the case for the majority of the time. So the sound quality, air quality, there was some AC going on. It was a very hot weekend, and you know, the moment you stepped out of the gaming room, you sort of realized how effective that was, considering again the number of people in the room. The only thing I would say is that almost any time that anyone tries to organize a tabletop event, they look at the amount of space in the room. You know, when they go to hire it, they usually go and have a look at it and sort of go, all right, here's the tables. Yeah, we can put, you know, 3x3s there, and the chairs are there, and they can put their bags there and their markers there. Fantastic. And it's never, ever enough. It's never, ever enough. And this was no exception. So there were times when, you know, because the rows were just that little bit closer to each other than you think they are. So a lot of wargamers are not the thinnest of people, and so when there's a whole lot of us with big bags or trays of minis and then chairs, and then you push back your chair because you need to stand up and reach over the table to do something, and as you do that you push your chair back and you suddenly realize you've just rammed it up the ass of the person playing behind you, and so there are always moments like that in every event, and for a lot of this event, I'm going to be very, very positive, because my overall impression of the event has been exactly that. But I think for any event, especially one that might want to run again, as I very much hope that this one does, then I think having feedback that you can actually take action on is useful. So you always would really appreciate even just an extra 5 centimeters of table anywhere to put some more markers, to put some more widgets, to have, you know, maybe a bit more space for your cards, your clock. I realize that it's the most expensive thing, I would imagine, in the organization of the whole thing, is the venue itself. And so I absolutely understand that when you then need to pass that cost on to 80 players, you don't want to, you know, you're sort of making that balance, aren't you? Well, do you really want that extra space for your cards if you have to pay an extra 20 euros a player times by 80 players, blah, blah, blah? Like, I get that there is maths involved, and if it's a decision that's made consciously, then I'm all for it. But if I were to give feedback on the venue, everything was excellent, except we could have done with a little bit more space between rows, because passing people was often difficult, especially with trays of minis, and back-to-back seating was sometimes a tiny bit difficult, but generally speaking, fantastic. Schedule. The schedule was tight, but it has to be. people have to travel to the event and they have to travel away from it at the end, and you want to fit in some kind of social possibilities, and people need to eat and all of that sort of stuff. So there needs to be a schedule, and it needs to have some kind of pressure to make progress built in. But at the same time, there are now, in a team event, there are two elements, right? So you've got the half an hour that was given for the pairing process itself, and then the 2.5 hours that were given to the round timer. And then you've got the sort of unofficial timing of everything that happens in between those two things. So, each round contains those two elements. Your 3 hours total, half for the pairing, 2.5 for the play. But then you've got to control how much time you have in between each round, each block of 3 hours to make the day work. And I would say that the half an hour for the team pairing was about perfect. It forced, you couldn't mess about. You really had to be constantly moving and saying, right, we're going to put this guy on this table. I will come on to how the format worked, but this guy on this table, okay, we're going to offer you these two things, okay, we'll pick that one. It was forcing, half an hour was enough, where so long as both captains kept things moving, then you finished just about perfectly within the half an hour, which meant that almost every player was starting their game with the full 2.5 hours available to them. I'm interested to know from other captains if they had the same problem I did, which was that I myself, as the captain, almost never got the full 2.5 hours playtime, because we were required to be part of that pairing process till the very end. So then by the time that pairing process finishes, we're sort of on the mark of the 2.5 hours, and then we finally get to go and sit down and look at our table and look at the pools and, shake hands with the opponent and, introduce ourselves, and then go through the process of picking masters, picking lists, and setting the game up. And I found that the result of that was that the champion, the captain, in this case me, was very often pushed for time within the 2.5 hour limit. And so if I were looking at the schedule next time, I think that the 2.5 hours of playtime is perfect, and that the half an hour of prep for the pairing is kind of perfect. But for the captain, they just need an extra 10 minutes, and I don't know where the hell you find it. And maybe that's the exact problem that the organisers came to, and that's why they arrived at the schedule that they did. And maybe it was just me. Maybe I was too slow with the pairing process, and if we'd sped that up a little bit, then by the time I reached my own table, I'd have had more time to do my personal prep for my game. I'd really, really love to hear about other captains' experience with that, because if they had it more smoothly than I did, then I'm more than willing to admit that I may have just been too slow with some stuff, and then that would have been perfect. So I think my breakdown of the schedule is almost perfect. Yeah. Okay. Judging. By the way, these things, I've just written down some topics, and they're done in no particular order, and I'm not going to pretend to try and sort of figure out an order that makes sense. I'm going to go through them and talk about them. Judging. We had the judging team of the organisers. So we had Edek, Trick, Celery, and Bober, and Zwe. So they were absolutely fantastic. They originally were concerned that there were going to be too many judge calls, that there weren't going to be enough of them, and that that was going to cause, clocks needing to be paused, which is going to cause problems with the round timers. And so they put into place a rule that your players had to contact captains first, and only captains could contact judges. None of us really liked that rule, because the captains weren't allowed to pause their clocks either, and it just kind of, it really didn't actually help. It just slowed things down. So players had to bother captains, then captains had to bother judges, and then judges had to come to the captains and then be told which table they were going to, and then go. And so that didn't end up working that way in the end. And so what happened was everyone sort of realized that there wasn't this overwhelming deluge of judge calls, and that judges could make it to the players, and that worked out really well. So this was adapted on the fly. The original, this was the first time that this event was run. So an event of this scope, came from nothing. So it's not like we had like a baby version in a previous year or month, and then this was the next. No, this was the first attempt. So everything was done with very best intentions in mind. And so these rules were set out to try to give them the best possible chance of running the smoothest possible event first time round. And I'm confident that they'll have their own thoughts on things that want to get tweaked for next year. And I think that the idea that we have to go player to captain to judge can be knocked on the head, because it wasn't necessary. It proved not to be necessary, and they adapted on the fly, and it ended up being really, really good. Every experience I had with the judges was amazing. Their knowledge of the game is top notch. Their decisiveness in terms of like, can this model see that model or not? Well, that's never an exact science. It's difficult. You've got lasers, you've got shaky hands, you've got clocks that are running, you've got players that are maybe a bit tense, but they would arrive quickly, make a decision, stand by it. Those decisions always seemed fair and informed. So I cannot speak highly enough of the judging. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Food. So food was, if I had to say, maybe a tiny negative, and it wasn't a fault of the organisers, and they did everything they could to mitigate it. It was simply that around the venue were a number of places, but they were a little bit away from the venue. Some of them only had, it was just, there wasn't a whole host of food options that were quick to get to and quick to deliver. And so they sort of suggested in advance that what you want to do is use Uber Eats or, Bolt to get food delivered to the venue, and try to do that in advance of the lunch hour so that everyone could get their food on time. As far as I know, that all worked. And I don't consider it a problem of the event at all. It didn't flow incredibly smoothly, and I was very glad that as a team we'd already sort of decided to come with our own food prepared, mostly. So we sort of had it cooked or prepared in advance, and then just sort of snacked from our bags. Because I think had we had to go out to like restaurants, there wasn't a whole host of choices, especially not if you wanted to eat in any way healthily. At least I didn't find them. So again, I'm only speaking from my experience. There may have been wonderful options that I completely missed. But I think, and again, this isn't a fault of the organizer, and I'm not sure how you fix it, because it's more linked to the venue, right? It's where you are, so it's just simply what's available around you. But the organisers did a very good job of making that very clear. So that was good. The tables. So obviously there were 80 of us, so 40 tables. That's a hell of a lot to set up, and I'm sure that a hell of a lot of resources went into creating terrain, borrowing terrain, sourcing terrain, painting it, preparing the tables, getting the mats. And then making sure that each table offered an experience, right? You don't want to just look at it and go, yeah, that's a table. You want to go, oh, that's interesting, because it forces a decision. And you also don't want, oh my god, who the hell's going to play on that table? It's bloody awful. Or maybe you do. I don't. As a player, I want a table to push me in the direction of needing to make decisions, but not to force me into only one possible choice, which is I have to take Incorporeal or have to take Leap. I don't want a table to force the issue way too hard, you get the point. So tables, I thought they did a great job. The tables were impactful. We as a team and our team strategy relied on finding certain tables for certain things. So we were looking for a pool and a table that allowed our Nikima 2 player to hide and durdle and, grow all their Nephilim and then just run out to the corners and score. And we wanted another table with a bunch of blocking for our Seamus player to secret passage around and murder people. And we wanted a nice open table for our Dashel 2 player to just run down the middle and hurt things. So the tables were impactful, and they impacted our strategy, and they impacted the games, and we thought they were good. If we're looking for, again, constructive criticism on them, there were a few too many cardboard insert kind of assembled terrain, and that stuff looks okay, looks fine, but it gets knocked about way too much and way too easily. So, and that can be a real problem in quite competitive games, right? You've got, people measuring and positioning themselves pretty carefully, and then somebody really, accidentally, of course, knocks a cardboard cutout of a wall over with a widget, and we try to put it back, but maybe it gets really, really difficult. So I would say really lean away from light cardboard-based terrain as much as possible, and if that involves needing to speak to the international community in advance and get them to bring their heavier wall segments or whatever with them, I know for a fact that we've got a couple of trays of terrain here, and we'd be more than happy to bring some of that. But in general, varied and well-built tables, happy with them. The format. So the format was an interesting one, and I would say very ambitious. Very ambitious. The previous year, as I mentioned, there was that event in Manchester, and that was 4-person teams. And we found that to be a bit odd because their idea was, you got one for each strategy, and we spoke about that afterwards, and most people, at least that I spoke to, agreed that it should probably be 3 or 5. So an odd number because it makes ties slightly less likely. Of course, in Malifaux, it's always possible. But 3 and 5 seemed good for that. And in terms of just respecting the size of various national Malifaux communities, that we were sort of thinking, can everybody that wants to take part, obviously I think in any major international event, one thing that you should be aiming for is to allow anyone that wants to come and play, right? That should be a pretty central theme, at least, again, this is in my eyes, my opinion. If there's a smaller community in a smaller country, perhaps, I would really want to be aiming to allow them to take part. A big thing that the Polish organisers did to make that happen in this case was they offered themselves and their teammates as mercenaries. So they said, right, we're not going to play ourselves, and if certain teams need certain players, reach out to us, we'll put you in touch with people. We'll also allow people that maybe don't have a local meta that could put a whole team together to sign themselves up as mercenaries, so that any other country that's missing, one player can then, write to them, get in touch and play. As a result of that, there were quite a few teams that had unions of maybe 2 countries or 2 metas or whatever, and so a lot of that really happened, and I thought they made great efforts to do that. Losing train of thought ever so slightly. Right. But instead of going 3 or 5 players, they went for 8 players. So instead of having 1 player for each strategy, as the Manchester tournament attempted to do, they instead had 1 player for each faction. So they wanted every team to have 1 player of each faction, so that we'd see the full faction spread in every single round. That is tricky for a lot of metas to do. It's tricky for 2 reasons. 1, you might not have a player of a certain faction, and 2 is you may very well have multiple players of the same faction. It caused, I imagine, the majority of teams, from the research that we did on teams and we were looking at their Longshank statistics and stuff like that, the majority of teams had at least 1 player who was not playing on their main faction. And I can imagine that was maybe a little bit dissatisfying for that player. The result of having every team with 1 of each faction was cool, and that we then had a balance and we didn't just see 30 Thunders players, 20 Rezzers, and I'm making these numbers up completely, but and 1 bio guy just sitting there with his Ma. It was cool to see the 80 players. And before the event, I was sort of saying, look, I'm willing to let them do it their way, and I think we'll just go and play and see how it goes. But I was a little bit doubtful of how it would be to play with 1 of each faction for every team. And it's funny because I thought that what would happen is after we played the event that it would be much clearer, and I'd be really on one side or the other, yeah, that was good, or no, it wasn't. And it's funny because we've now played it and I'm still not sure. I see the upsides, I really do. I think there was a real thematic element to having 1 of every faction available in every team. It made the pairing process itself interesting. But at the same time, yeah, one of our best players had to play his off faction. We couldn't really invite one of our meta to come because we had we have two players that only play that faction, and so we had to pick one of them. And so there were little things like that, and I'm sure that some countries struggled to get the full complement of 8 factions covered. Again, this is one of those where I'd be really interested to hear what the other captains thought of that and what the other players thought of that. I also feel like there'd be quite a lot of countries that would have been able to put forward 2 teams if the number of players per team was lower, if it was, for example, 5, or definitely if it was 3. And when there are 8 players, and I'm just sort of thinking out loud, in fact this whole video is me thinking out loud, so I hope you're okay with it, because that's what we're doing. When there are 8 players, it's a little bit trickier to have what am I trying to say? Like the team camaraderie, right? When there's 8 people, you always end up sort of breaking into smaller groups because 8 people can't talk together at once. If you've got teams of 3 or 5, you can sort of be having a group conversation. When it gets all the way up to 8, it starts to be, splitting off a little bit in terms of 2 conversations going on at once, stuff like that. And I don't just mean like during the games or whatever. Obviously, during the games, you're focused on your opponent and on your game. But I mean, during dinners and lunches and stuff. I don't know. I'm really, really interested. Please let me know what you think and thought of 8-man teams. I'm going to leave it there. That's all I want to say about the number of players. Right, the format was as follows. So you've all got your 8 factions. And the captains come play rock, paper, scissors to get to see who gets to put down the first player. You've got 8 tables in a row, so I'm going to talk about rows a little bit in the video. And when I say a row, I mean the row of 8 tables available for that game. If we take an example of our team versus the German team, we won the rock, paper, scissors, so we get to put down the first player. We've then got cards which represent our 8 factions. There was one little caveat here, which is the first thing we had to do was put one of the factions, chosen hidden information, and put that card away. That card was sort of put face down somewhere unseen for the rest of this process and was revealed at the end. That was referred to as the champion. I'll talk about why I don't think that was the best naming solution for this player, but was a cool idea nonetheless. Right, so the champions were selected hidden. After that, the team that won the rock, paper, scissors was able to choose who puts the first player out. They then choose a player. So for example, they choose a faction. Let's say we chose Bio and we chose table 7. Each table had its own scheme pool and strategy. So in every row, there were 2 of each strategy. There was some discussion before the tournament whether it should be like that. It was decided that it should be. I'm now firmly of the opinion that that was an excellent idea and should be repeated. I thought it was great and really provided a good breadth of options. So on each row you had each strategy represented twice, and then pretty much random scheme pools, and none of them were the same. So they were all different, and so in advance, by in advance, I mean on the morning of the event, we received copies of the 5 rounds of all the pools, but in the day before the tournament, we had no idea what was coming. I think that's very much a subjective thing, whether you think that's good or not. I personally like to prepare more than that, but that was the decision of the organisers, and I certainly don't mind it. I think that's their call. So you put down your bio player on table 7, for example. Your opponent is then able to offer 2 factions that bio player can choose from, and then the bio player is able to say which one they want to face, and then the one which is not chosen goes back into the pool. So in some systems, that one would then be sort of locked in. In this one, it's not. So the one that isn't chosen goes back into the hand. Let's say, if we say that each captain has a hand of players that they can play, it goes back into the hand, and then they, from their whole hand, can pick any table that's remaining, obviously not table 7, and any faction that's remaining, not the ones that were chosen for that game. That process repeats all the way to the last couple of tables, at which point they simply are left with only 1 or 2 choices, and there's no real choice. So then one team gets to decide basically, right, we've only got these 2 factions left, so which one do we want to play on which table? This one on this one, this one on this one, okay. And then that one that was hidden earlier is revealed at the end, so the champions are then both revealed, and they are matched against each other on the last remaining table. So very, very often, this idea of a champion didn't really work, because the player that you wanted to put down as a champion generally was the one that didn't care about table or pool. They needed to be able to play on any table and on any pool, because they would not know or have very little direction over which table or pool they played on. So in actual fact, the champion tended to be the all-comer, and was very rarely sort of like your best player or something like that, which I think some people had this sort of romantic notion that it might go that way, and we might have pistols at dawn on the final table. It's not really how it went. I don't think any team, except for maybe the Italians, God bless them, chose to play it that way. That was the format. I think it was very cool. I think considering this is the first event of this kind that's had any success, I loved it, and I would consider dropping the number of players to 5. I appreciate there would be quite a number of impacts to that choice, and I haven't spent a long time thinking through them all, and maybe the organisers have. That's it. That's all I'm going to say about format. Sportsmanship. I have very rarely seen better sportsmanship anywhere ever. Unbelievably polite games, kind people, agreements between players, judges not needing to be involved for anything that wasn't simply a questioning of how does this work. It was never like, I think this and he thinks that. It was, even in the cases where it was sort of like, we can't really decide, it was always phrased that we're really not sure. Could you just let us know if that model can fit in there or not? Yes, it can. No, it can't. Great. Thanks so much. And that was I mean, I have, it was a high level of competition, and it unbelievably pleasant games with low pressure and everybody making a real effort to make the experience of everyone in the room pleasant. I have nothing but good things to say about the sportsmanship of everyone involved. I heard about 1 or 2 tiny instances of miscommunication, or of, maybe something being a bit rushed or something like that. And in almost every case, I heard about an immediate and total apology, and that it was, totally forgiven, and so on and so forth. So really, nothing but good things to say about the sportsmanship. Okay, I'm going to cross some things off my list here so that I can keep this moving along. Cool. The hobby side of the event. So for those who don't know, I am one of the players least interested in the hobby side of the game, probably in the world. I don't care at all about painting, about proxies, about basing, about terrain. I don't care about any of it. I would happily play on 2D tables with unpainted minis, and frankly, they could sit in their sprue for all I care. I'm all about the game itself, the competition, the strategy, and things like that. I'm well aware that that is not the opinion of the vast majority of players, and that some level of hobby participation is really appreciated by a great number of players. As a result of that, I think it's perfectly reasonable for an event of this size and prestige to request fully painted models. I think that going down the route that other systems have tried in the past of actually defining what fully painted means, in other words, number of colors or number, needs to have washes or this, absolute nonsense, because people will always find their ways to get around these types of rules anyway. And so I think that the system that was used, which is the words honest effort, I think honest effort was the choice words used for the hobby side of things, was an excellent decision. So I think if you say, look, we require fully painted models, and we request that you make an honest effort to do so, then you're going to get good results, because I think that is, people understand that, people are willing to go with that, and different people have different skill when it comes to hobbies. They have different ideas of how much effort should be going into it or not, but if you ask them to make the best they can and you leave it to the player, then I think you're going to end up with the vast majority of the room with a quality that you're happy with, and the players themselves don't feel too much stress coming in and so on and so forth. However, in addition to that, the organisers decided that basing was going to be mandatory. I think myself, and I don't think I'm alone in this one, think that mandatory basing is overstepping a little bit, because basing is really sort of moving into the hobby side of things. It's not that sort of minimum. It's not like, yeah, you want things painted, you want things to look nice, or a lot of people do, and I get that. But basing is a decorative choice. If you want to base your models, maybe you've been thinking about, yeah, I really want to do graveyards. I want to have all my guys on little graveyards and stuff like that, but I just haven't quite got round to it. And I don't want to have to, but I've got this tournament in a month, so I have to, and then mandatory basing. So now I don't have time to do the graveyards that I want to do. So now I'm just going to have to, glue some sand onto all of them and then rip it off later and stuff like that. I really don't think mandatory basing is a cool decision at all. People should have their own decision on whether to base at all. I certainly wouldn't have done. I would have done no basing at all on any of my minis. I didn't look at anyone else's minis. I've no idea what anyone's minis look like that I was playing against. I didn't even see them. They didn't register in my eyes at all. I'm aware again that that's not the case for a lot of players, but the idea that someone thinks I might have noticed what type of basing they use, I'm sorry, but I didn't give a fuck. Not a solitary shit. So that the fact that I really wasn't willing to do basing on my models, so I had to get a teammate to do it. He was very kindly willing to roll out waste a shitload of hours doing green stuffed inserts for all the bases, then slicing his fingers to bits, snapping all my models off their bases, and then gluing these inserts back in, gluing the models back onto them, and then because sometimes didn't use enough glue on those, then those models all came off during the games, and I had to waste time trying to glue models back on during games and stuff like that. Just a total waste of time, and a really unnecessary and troublesome requirement for an event that was unnecessary. It was a waste of time. It wasn't necessary. In addition to that, because this event was at a timing that was a bit unfortunate in terms of Ashes has been released, but the weird release schedule of the models is way further down the track, so there's models waiting to be released. There's a bunch of boxes not yet available. It was obvious that a lot of people had been playing with Ashes models for some time, especially in our local metas, so we were all using proxies for those, and of course that's going to happen, and that's totally fine. No one can control that. That's not a fault of the organisers whatsoever, but I think we need to be a lot more understanding of the fact that proxies are going to be used. Of course they are, because the Ashes models have been released. They've been in the app for a long time. We've all been training with them, and so again, there was a strictness to the proxy process that was just massively unnecessary. So it felt like we had the hobby police basically demanding submissions of proxies by a deadline with a certain quality, and then it would come back with we think you should add more flowers to this, and do you think you could maybe make it a little bit more westerny because it's not quite good enough? And it's like, who the fuck are you to tell me whether my proxy is good enough or not? Like, again, I think that you started with an excellent approach, which is to say honest effort. You do the best you can to make your proxy look like the model should be, and then leave it to the players. We're all grown up. Like, we can all make our own choices, and anyone who ever comes to a game and says, by the way, this is this model, is that cool? Of course it is, no problem. Rather than having a team full of people stressing about, oh God, I've got to get my proxy submitted by a certain deadline. Oh, but they're not based yet. Oh, but then they need to be painted. But what if it's not accepted? Well, what if I need to paint and base it and then it's not accepted, and now I need to cut it off and do another one, and then no. Fuck off. Just fuck off. It's not in any way beneficial to a large event to have that level of fuckery about the hobby aspect. Promote it, have painting competitions, have awards for people who have the best hobby stuff. It's a skill, and it's one that is appreciated by a lot of players. There's nothing wrong with having hobby elements, and there's nothing wrong with drawing attention to them, and there's nothing wrong with asking for a certain level as a minimum. But that certain level should be, I think, along the lines of honest effort, and at that point, stop policing it, stop monitoring it, leave it to the players, let them decide what honest effort is, and then if the result at the end of the event is something that you're really not happy with, then reassess. But I mean, honestly, I have almost nothing but good things to say about this event, but this was the one thing that pissed me off. Right. Very happy to be done with that, so we can continue to move on with some good stuff. Level of swag. Gifts, freebies, bits and pieces that were given to each player, goodie bags, absolutely amazing. So we had faction-specific widgets with your team name on, with the team with your faction colours and logos. We had cookies with allergen warning as well for those who were allergic to nuts and stuff. So I thought that was very thoughtful. But still really cool, especially for those of us who maybe had drunk too much on Saturday, needed some breakfast on Sunday. Ooh, cookies. So I did also think it would have been hilarious if someone had just snuck a little bit of marijuana in there. We just had a very chill event. Obviously completely illegal and definitely don't do it, but it would have been funny. So swag, yes. Also, little bags. Oh shit! Have I got? Yes, look at that. God damn it, mine's right there. Hold on. Have I even got some swag in it? Can I demonstrate some swag? I can demonstrate some swag. Look at this. Right. So one of the cookies that didn't get eaten. There you go. There's a cookie. I'm going to eat that in a minute. I've only just realised it was there. Fantastic news. That's like sofa pizza. And then we've got little bags of, cartographer's cups, some base inlays, some widgets. What else we got? A couple of little discount bits for the stores that provided some of the stuff. So this is Gaming Forge. And where was that one made? Can't see. But yeah, fantastic. Loved it. And then that all came in. Can I get this on? Oh, hello. I've just lost another bit. What's that now? Oh, that's it. So a 50ml Carto cup with the Thunder. They sort of had the Thunder's logo as their thing. And that all came in one of these little cloth bags with the Carto Cup logo on it. And that's actually a very cool little idea, because a lot of people turn up to these events on flights or, in cars that are filled with a bunch of blokes with or ladies, sorry, filled with a shitload of minis, and so your bag is very often completely heavily packed, and you've got no space for anything, and then you suddenly turn up and get, you maybe win a oh, there was a tombola as well, so everyone who gave feedback, which was pretty much everybody, used the little tear off bit from the feedback sheet as a tombola sort of raffle ticket, and then that led to a bunch of prizes that were a bunch of like alternative models and mystery boxes and loads of cool stuff. Really, I think that the organisers did an amazing job of coordinating with Weird and with sponsors to get a bunch of gear, and the little bags were fantastic for carrying all of that stuff that you maybe weren't expecting around with you to and from the venue, and especially for people who wanted to leave their minis at the venue, that was possible. Great idea, really helpful, but then of course you've got bag to move stuff around. So these bags, great idea. I know they're only a small thing, but the combination of small things make for an amazing weekend. So swag, top notch, well done, done well, and yeah, perfect. Travel, I'll be pretty quick about this one. The venue itself was close to the airport. The venue was a little bit outside of the centre of Warsaw, which led to a couple of things in terms of like the major drinking spots were a little bit further away from the area of Warsaw where we were, but yeah, close to the airport, close to major roads. I think it wasn't that far away from bus and rail, so I think when you're doing a big international event, the main thing is to be as close to international travel as possible. So I think Warsaw was a very good choice, and that area seemed pretty good. I didn't hear about any nightmares travel wise, so ideal, well thought through, good idea. social aspects. So again, one of the things that was maybe learned from in Manchester was that there was very little organised in the way of teams meeting up to chat and do stuff before or after the events. And therefore, most of the teams sort of turned up, stayed in their little team bubble, in their little team house, came, played their team tournament, went home, chatted in their teams and had dinner, and then went back to their home country. And we didn't get to sort of do as much socializing between the teams, and that didn't create as many sort of stories and things that you share when you're looking back on those events in following years, which I think is a big part of other events in other systems that I've been to. And this event, the Cartographer's Cup, was much, much more prepared for that. So there was a pre-party, an after-party at two different venues. Our team, unfortunately, got stuck in traffic and were a bit split up in terms of when we were going to arrive. We didn't get there until late, so we missed the pre-party. Therefore, I can't tell you if it was good or not. But the after party, which was the one on the Saturday evening, was excellent. So we had a whole room sort of privately booked, and all the teams could turn up there, and there was a little window in the corner where you can order your drinks and some food until about 10 p.m. and then the lady would shout at you in Polish until you turned up and tried to find your food. A little bit chaotic, but when you've got that many people, of course it is. The wait times for food were pretty massive, and they were pretty overestimated. So you'd go to the window and you'd ask, like, can we have some food? And they'd be like, yeah, sure, it'll be 90 minutes. Or some people were hearing like 2 hours. It's like, really? Well, like, of course we're not going to order that then. But if you did order it, then it turned up about 30 minutes later. So I don't know why they were really trying to sort of put people off from ordering. That was a bit weird. And I think some people obviously did get put off by that because they've just finished a full day's tournament. And so then they went off and went somewhere else. And maybe that sort of split up a few of the people. So a bit of a shame there. But I don't think that was anything to do with the organisers. That was to do with the people at the venue for the party, which wasn't the same as the venue for the tournament, but it was close by. But yeah, as a result of that, we had lots of teams sort of all sitting around. Some of them then, after, I think at the start, a lot of teams just go and hang around together and sort of, debrief on the day. But once that had happened, I saw quite a lot of teams at least having some members, mingling around. I got to go and chat with some of the guys from Sweden because I didn't even know they had a Malifaux community, so I was really interested. I was having a chat with the Italian guys while we were in the queue, just sort of chatting Malifaux. Went and had a chat with the Polish teams that I've met in other events from Wrocław and Krakow. So it was really cool to see those guys again. I really enjoyed their company. I missed the German guys because they left a bit earlier, but one or two of them stayed and were getting absolutely hammered with the organisers, so that was hilarious to see. And our team ended up sort of socialising with the Hungarian team quite a lot for the evening. I was hopping around all over the place. It was a very entertaining evening, and a lot of people seemed to drink a good amount. So I think having a plan for some possibilities to be social is fantastic, and it wasn't like you didn't feel like it was organised fun. That can always suck. So I think it was kind of left up to the players. They were given an opportunity and then left up to them to do something with it, and I think that was a good way of doing it. And honestly, I felt it was decent. I'd love to hear other teams' thoughts on that, but yeah. Overall, great. Okay, you'll be glad to know we are running out of topics because this has been going for a while, but it was a really huge event and well worth spending a bit of time talking about. Level of competition. So the level of competition was very, very high. We had 80 players, and from 80 players, are all of them going to be the top of the MWS? No. But were some of them the top of the MWS? Yes. And some of the teams were frightening, I know, because I did the opposition research and went through Longshanks, looking at all the stats of the players, trying to get an idea in advance of which masters they played, which schemes they favoured, and what their win rate was, so we could have an idea of strength of player in advance. And when you start looking at a couple of those teams, you go, oh shit, this isn't good. And then a couple of the teams didn't have a lot of Longshanks information because either they don't use it or because they were sort of newer players that had come across from other systems and maybe just been building a meta locally and hadn't sort of used that system yet. So that was interesting. Or some had Longshanks data on factions that they didn't play in the event because, as I said, 8 players, 8 factions, not everyone could play their main faction. So Longshanks data isn't everything, but it was sort of what we had to work with in advance. So on the day, I had excellent games with every opponent. Now, we had a bit of a weird situation, which is that in advance, we sort of tried to, by looking at the information we had available, rank the teams in terms of threat level. And we had sort of Germany, Poland, and France as the most threatening. And we hoped along with ourselves. And then we had a couple of the sort of backup Polish teams, Hungarian teams as probably along the weaker side. And then we had a couple of unknowns, like potential dark horse stuff with Italy and Sweden, because we just didn't know anything about them and maybe they're going to come and kick our ass. So we were looking at that. And we, as the Czech team, ended up facing Germany, France and Poland on day one. So we're like, oh, for the fucking love of God. We just wanted one warm-up round and we got the 3 hardest opponents in our eyes back-to-back, one by one. Which was our SOS was absolutely phenomenal. But anyway, that's separate. So level of competition very high, and especially when you're combining that with such an incredible high level of sportsmanship, I would say those 2 things alone should be wetting your whistle to attend this event if you weren't able to make it. If you're from a country that didn't manage to get a team in for this year, I can only recommend strongly that you keep an eye out for the sign up for next year. If that happens, it's been spoken about as a hope. It has not been announced and it has not been confirmed, but I really, really hope that it is. And if it is, I very strongly suggest that you get a team in ASAP, because given the success of this year, I would imagine it will be an incredibly popular event and you will need to get yourself sorted. I've already had 2 different countries that didn't managed to make it this year get in touch with me about, when's the next one, can we sign up? I'd love to. And that kind of enthusiasm is infectious and very, very positive. Communication. This is an interesting one. I was one of the captains, and I'm going to stop saying that. I sound like a prick. Apologies. It's not meant as a boast. It's meant as as an explanation for what I'm about to say. So the organisers, as mentioned previously with the rules, also decided to do a lot of their communication pre-event via captains. So the idea was they didn't want to have a massive communication between the 4 or 5 organisers and 80 players all asking a plethora of questions and really throwing things into chaos. So they decided to only invite the captains to a specific Discord server, and then to have the captains responsible for passing that information on to the players. Within that context, the communication of the organisers was excellent. They were incredibly quick at responding to questions. They did so in detail and with thought. They were open to changing their ideas based on the feedback of the captains and thus the teams. And they were quick to announce things which had been changed or which were important. I thought it was fantastic. So as one of the captains, the communication aspect was excellent. However, speaking to some of the players, they had a different experience because they didn't have this Discord. They only had the information that was being fed to them from the captains. They didn't know if the captains were giving them all of the information or not, if they'd missed anything or not, or if they were picking and choosing what to pass on and what wasn't important. They only had the main website of the event. So at the start, when the event was first submitted as an idea, there was a nice website made with a bunch of graphics and a schedule and a bunch of stuff there with the player pack and everything like that, all really well set out. But unfortunately, that website was not really updated very often at all. And some of the information wasn't even updated on the day of the event. So, for example, the schedule still showed the wrong location for one of the pre-parties or after-parties. I can't remember which one it was. But it was only if the captain had paid attention and then passed that information on to their players, and if the players knew to ignore the main site. And the main site had some pop-up for when an update had been made, but those updates were made relatively infrequently, and especially towards the actual launch of the event, it was sort of drifted off the back end. Now, I thought the website was really well done. It was nice looking, and it gave all the information that you wanted, but unfortunately, it does need to be kept up to date. I think having all of the players who are going to attend the event in the Discord is correct. Now, whether you then have a role for captains and you make only captains able to post in the majority of channels, and you make it clear that maybe there's one general channel, but that we as organizers are not going to be checking this channel. You guys can all chat as much as you want, but if you want anything directed at us, then it should be captains. And you could even have a hidden channel that most people can't see, and it's only for the captains. But I think the majority of information should go to the majority of players. It was some feedback that we got from the players. They didn't feel like they were being fully informed all the time. Even when I, as a captain, was passing on as much information as I possibly could, they couldn't help feeling a bit left out. And feelings are important even if they're not accurate. That sounded bullshitty. Hopefully you know what I mean. Communication in general, I think, was excellent. Could be better in the way I've just described. Possibly, depending on your view, and depending on whether, as the organisers, you felt that you were already getting overloaded with just the captain's feedback, and that if all the players came in like the floodgates, you would be fucked. Well, that's your decision, and it's yours to make. But from the players' point of view, I think they felt a bit left out. That was it. It also dampened hype, right? Because having more questions and more, for example, after the event, there were some photos that were posted in that Discord just of people heading home and of one person, clutching the trophy while they slept in the car and that sort of thing. And those are nice little moments. And did I remember to copy and paste every single one of those to every single player? No, I didn't. Did that dampen the experience for those players? Probably, because I really enjoyed seeing all those little things and the little jokes and banter between the captains. So it'd be nice, I think, to have that available to everybody. Maybe that's something the organisers were already thinking about, but passing along that I think it would be a good idea. Okay. We are coming up to the hour. So the meta. The meta for this event was a strange one because you could largely choose exactly which strat you wanted to play. A singular example, you can sort of extrapolate this to a lot of others, but you could guarantee, pretty much, that you would have one table available to you at least with lots of blocking terrain. And so Seamus would be able to find his table if you wished. And every team knew that that was the case. If they'd read the pairing process and thought about it, they should have been able to work out that there will always be a Seamus table available for a Seamus player. As such, every team should be able to turn up with 2 players who have an answer to Seamus and hold them until the opposing team declares their Seamus. Or Rezzers, I should say. And so that was sort of interesting. And then the other major example that popped up a lot was Rasputina and Silent One's channeling through Ice Pillars on Cloak and on Stuff the Ballot specifically are pretty massively fucking broken. And guess what? Raspy showed up a hell of a lot every single time on Cloak and Dagger and Stuff the Ballots. Ooh, shocker. That is an unusual thing that you wouldn't find in a standard individual meta. And skewed the stats quite a bit in certain areas. Other things which were maybe a little bit skewed or surprising was that, generally speaking, if we talk about the MWS, for example, or the metas that I know and speak to, Thunders are in a very, very good spot competitively, whereas at the Cartographer's Cup, they were very, very lacking. I was the top Thunders in the end, and I didn't feel like I had a particularly amazing performance. I ended up with 4 wins and 1 loss. And I think that generally speaking, a lot of Lin Lee was played, but with not the most fantastic results. In fact, I think they may have been even less than 50%. Quite a bit of Misaki was played, and I don't consider her one of our strongest masters. And so I think there were a lot of strange meta considerations that came in. And for example, Explorers did very, very well, largely with McCabe, but also with Maxine. And I think that is more indicative of a sort of an international meta. That, that's about right, I would say. But I mean, who am I to say? But because every faction was forced to be represented, and because, but then you look at Bio, for example, and they basically only had Ma. So almost every Bio player was playing Ma most of the time. I think it was like out of 50 games, it was like 34 games of Ma or something. I mean, yeah, that's the state of Bio more than it is the state of a team tournament. But there were some really interesting points, and I recommend you to go and have a look at the stats page for the Cartographer's Cup. If I remember, I'll pop it in the description for you to take a look. Oh, fuck it. I mean, we could just do it now. Have I got this? Yeah, okay, so let's do this. Is this going to work? Let's find out together. Hey, look at that. Oh my god, the box even lines up. Cool. Right. We are looking at the Longshanks for Cartographer's Cup. So if you didn't know, the Bears and Roosters team won the event. That is the French and Swiss alliance. A lot of people called them Team France because when they signed up, that's what they were. And then no one kind of realised that the Swiss had kind of joined the party. But yeah, the French and Swiss players won the event. They went 23 wins, 12 losses, and 5 draws. With 223 VP. I'm going to read some of this out because it might be quite small on your screen. And so they had 13 tournament points. Team Poland, I'm going to call them Poland 1, came in second place. They had 4 wins and 1 loss. And they were 26 wins. This is individual record. 26 wins, 6 losses, and 8 draws. So even maybe a slightly better individual record than the French-Swiss team. Then there was ourselves, the Czech and Slovak team. We finished with 3 wins, 1 draw, and 1 loss. We had 20 wins, 16 losses, and 4 draws, so we had quite a lot more losses than the 2 teams above us. And fewer draws. And then in fourth was Team Germany, so 20, 14, and 6, very similar to ourselves. But as a team record, they had 2 wins, 2 losses, and 1 draw. Then Team Italy, 2 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw. By the way, those 4 were our 4 opponents. So we hit all of the top teams in the event, which is cool in one way, but kind of a bit unlucky in the other way. It would have been nice to have one relaxing game, as a lot of these other teams did. Italy 16, 18, and 6. Then we had Breslau Banshees, and we're going to call these Poland 2 because they were the second best Polish team at this event. So they were 2 wins, 2 losses, and a draw. 15 wins, 22 losses, and 3 draws. And then we get down to Austria Dutch, Sweden, Poland 3, and Hungary, all sort of moving towards the lower end of the win-draw-loss ratio. Good lord. I won't read them all out. If we move on to individual players, this is where I think things get maybe a bit easier to parse because it's more consistent. So we'll have a look at the 4-5-0 players. So we had Robin from France-Swiss. We had Oldedesse from Poland. We had Harold from Germany and Shiro from Poland 2. I think that might even be Poland 3. I think Poland 3 had a 5-0 player. Bravo. Right. Sorry, my voice still hasn't fully recovered. So top player was a McCabe 2 spammer. Filthy bastard. Although, from what I remember, someone said that he at least in the game against our team, which was against Mini, he was playing against our Bass. Our guy played Bass in that game? Okay. Anyway, so he was playing McCabe 2, and he played without Echo, without Botanists, which in Explorers McCabe is very unusual, and maybe even without Ducat as well. So it was like some double Rider, Sidir, Desper, something like Curator. Just a really for me, interesting way of playing McCabe 2 in Explorers, because it's not the way that I've seen or played, so I'd love to hear more about that. But yeah, McCabe 2 is not a surprise at all for anyone, and in Explorers, very strong, and that he went 5-0. Bravo, well done indeed. Aldedesse was playing Arcanist and had a fair mix, so 3 games of Colette and 2 games with Sandeep, but the Colettes were a little, 2 of 2, 1 of 1, and then Sandeep 2 both times. I normally wouldn't have to mention that it was Sandeep 2, but Aldedesse is one of the only players I know who ever plays Sandeep 1. The fact that he didn't in this event may be interesting, but there we are. And then we've got Harold over on the Team Germany with Euripides 2 and Dreamer 2. And then we've got Shiro, who was playing a slightly less conventional mix of Molly 1 and Stuck 1. So I also faced a bit of Molly. I saw a fair amount of Molly at the event. She seems to be making a little bit of a comeback. Kruligans are pretty fucking busted in the current GG, and frankly in most GGs. But Stuck 1, not a really super common pick. So, yeah, really cool to see all of that. And then we'll have a quick look at the 4-0-1 players, because they're technically undefeated, so very much worthy of a mention. So we have the Charles from France and Swiss. We've got Cricket from the Austrian-Dutch Union and from the MWS. We have Uluk from Italy, Zabek from Poland, Irenka also from Poland, Joker Boy from the Austrian-Dutch Union, and then Mark from the French-Swiss combination there, and then a bunch of 4-1s as well, including myself. My loss was up against Quicket, and yeah, I made the mistake of not playing Asami one game and thus lost one game. I can highly recommend playing Asami if you're on Thunders. It's good times. Well, for you. So that is the stats and the meta covered, and the only thing left to talk about would be my games from my perspective. I think that would be a bit too much and a bit too long for this video, so sufficient to say that Asami is very, very good. And I will be putting out a couple of guides to Asami 1 and 2 on this channel, and I'll probably talk about those Cartographer's Cup games in those guides, so I think it's probably best that we call it here for this video. And I'll bring us back to the full screen to sign off. This was, I think, the biggest event of the year. I think that you should be looking out for it next year. I think the organisers of this event should be incredibly proud of what they've achieved. I think that the countries involved in putting together full teams of 8 and making the event what it was. Obviously, no event would be anything without all the players. So the level of sportsmanship, the level of competition, everyone should be damn proud of it, frankly. And I have very little but very, very good things to say about this event. Keep your eyes out for the next one. I look forward to hearing other people's views on it, and I hope you've enjoyed mine. That's it from me. As I say, look out for the Asami 1 and 2 guides. I'll also be posting a few of my recent games from the previous Drayson Cup. I was keeping those under wraps until this event was done because I didn't really want to publish exactly how I was intending to play for the event before the event. So, yeah. Look forward to all of that. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, feel free to hit me up with the comments, and I will do my best to get back to you, or not, as you wish. All the best. Take care.